When you think about video game controversies, you probably first off think about games like Grand Theft Auto or Halo, but the Call of Duty series, surprisingly, actually has a very long and extensive history with various different controversies that a lot of people forget about nowadays. Some of these are really serious and some of these are kind of silly, so let's take a look through the entire history of Call of Duty and go over each of its controversies. Now, when it comes to the earliest days of Call of Duty, the main trilogy of games, for the most part, avoided getting into too much hot water, with one exception. Call of Duty 2, surprisingly, fell in the crosshairs of some decently sized criticisms itself. So let's start off with the Call of Duty 2 false advertising campaign. 2005 was a really interesting time in the gaming industry. I mean, game publishers were looking for any competitive edge that they could get to have more people purchase their games. And with that, more and more game studios were starting to use pre-rendered visuals to promote their upcoming title. And with the huge popularity that Call of Duty originally was, Activision decided to pull out all of the stops for Call of Duty 2 and have this very high quality rendered cinematic used as a representation for their game and for the commercials that they would market for Call of Duty 2. I mean, this is 2005, and other than the low resolution, the detail in the animation is actually incredibly impressive. Except Call of Duty fell under criticism because the action and moments in the scene and the graphics are not at all reflective of what the actual game looks like. This ended up getting a lot of backlash from potential consumers, to the point where in the UK, the Advertising Standards Authority ended up receiving complaints about these ads, as viewers were finding them misleading because the graphics appeared much better in these ads than what you would actually see in the game. Activision actually countered these complaints, saying that the use of pre-rendered scenes in game ads was a common practice and that they had acted in good faith in representing their game, but the ASA ended up ruling that the ads breached advertising standards and these commercials got banned from being shown in their current form, though we would see these ads continue to run in other regions. The fact that they did get banned in the UK, though, did spark a lot of discussion online from the player base and other people just talking about video games in general about the practice of using pre-rendered cutscenes to represent gameplay, because this was around the time where things like the Killzone 2 trailer at E3 was being talked about, because that was very impressive and not at all reflective of the real game. And just a few years before, Activision had come under scrutiny because of another ad that they did for Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, which faced complaints but was still allowed to run, surprisingly. But this was just the tipping point for Call of Duty and criticisms, because from here on out, things got bigger and more controversial as we go along. Call of Duty 4 was a massive turning point for the franchise, as this game made the massive jump into the bigger mainstream, became a multiplayer juggernaut, and with COD 4 was an influx of a ton of new players picking up Call of Duty and experiencing both the solid campaign and competitive multiplayer. At this point, this was the biggest Call of Duty had ever been. And of course, with Call of Duty making the jump to a modern era during a time where the real world US was at war in the Middle East, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare drew a lot of real world parallels in their storytelling, which inevitably would lead to some controversies of its own. Let's talk about the Call of Duty 4 realism debate. Now, this is something that comes up time and time again with every new release most of the time nowadays, but Call of Duty 4 was a big turning point for the franchise, becoming more popular than ever and now jumping into a different time period, a more relevant time period than the previous World War II stories that it had been telling. And while there has been a lot of criticisms and scrutiny over the realism in video games since pretty much video games started to become more popular, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare easily became the center of attention just because of the jump in quality and presentation that was present here. I mean, that was one of the drawing appeals of COD 4. This was like a realistic, modern, dare I say, military simulator game. So of course, this game would be targeted by people who were kind of against any video game that has any level of violence in it, especially because of Call of Duty's use of realistic weaponry and locations inspired by real-world conflict. This was also one of the first Call of Duty games to blatantly allow you to commit war crimes in the campaign, which will be a recurring criticism Call of Duty runs into, but they were doing it back in COD 4, just not as many people noticed it. In the campaign, towards the end, you put on the clothes of enemies and then engage in combat, which is against the 1949 Geneva Convention laws. Actually, matter of fact, we do see a lot of war crimes in both sides of things across the entire Call of Duty franchise in games that take place past 1949. This specific one is addressed in Article 39 of the First Geneva Convention, where essentially wearing enemy clothing to blend in with the enemy or to gain an advantage in combat is considered a form of perfidy. Perfidy involves acts that are intended to deceive the enemy, like pretending to be a non-combatant, using enemy emblems, or faking a surrender. But of course, in war, a lot of these lines end up getting blurred in the real world and in video games. It's not surprising to see some big covert operation that's going on here to, you know, make some exceptions to the Geneva Convention rules, I guess. I thought it was accurate storytelling, but of course that didn't stop critics from getting angry about it. Then on the flip side of controversies, Call of Duty 4 also ran into some controversy as there were dog combatants that you have to face off against in a couple of sections of the game. And there was criticism with COD 4, but that criticism continued on into 2008 with the release of Call of Duty World at War. So let's take a look at the Call of Duty PETA complaints. Okay, so like PETA itself is kind of controversial on two levels. Sometimes they do goofy things in the real world, like, I don't know, host a funeral reception for like food. And then other times, PETA does some stuff that's actually kind of goofy and almost something that you can laugh at, and I think they're aware of that at the same time. I mean, they've protested everything. They protest Animal Crossing even. So surely they're going to call out Call of Duty at some point along the way. And in 2008, World at War was kind of the center of attention, but also stemming from the Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare campaign levels as well. But World at War took things a step further because you could now call in a pack of dogs for your 7 kill streak, which honestly was way cooler of a kill streak for 7 kills back in the day than the Call of Duty 4 chopper gunner that you could call in. I don't know, I just felt like the dogs were way harder to survive against. This story was published by PETA itself, which brought this into the public eye, but after the release of Call of Duty World at War, some students at a Massachusetts high school began protesting this game, stating that killing dogs is a form of entertainment over and over again is one of the objects of the game, and also said that parents need to know what they are buying their kids and that killing animals should not be a form of entertainment. PETA shared this story, but then also said that they would offer to host a seminar for developing empathy for animals to Activision Blizzard employees, and also said that they were sending over a package of copies of Nintendogs to their office to try to influence the next Call of Duty game. I don't know, this one's just really weird. But that wasn't the only thing World at War was hit with. World at War also had some pretty heavy censorship after this Call of Duty game released. Matter of fact, the censorship was at its largest probably in Germany, of all places. And it's interesting because just like a little over a decade ago, the way video games were treated in Germany was much more stricter than they are now today. And Luke, who co-runs Rocket Sloth with me, was a teenager when Call of Duty World at War came out, and he was living in Germany, obviously, because he's German. So Luke's perspective is kind of like a first-hand experience of what happened with Call of Duty World at War over there and what kids were doing.
Yeah, when I was younger, German Beyblades were completely banned from any video games. They were allowed for movies and TV because those were considered art, and video games were not considered under the same art law, so these Beyblade symbols had to stay out of video games for a long time. And for Call of Duty specifically, these symbols would be replaced with this cross symbol, and sometimes there would also be this eagle above the symbol as well. And me being like a teenager at the time, I obviously wanted to play the uncut version because that's the cool version to play, right? But you could either order the Xbox 360 version from the UK or the PlayStation 3 version, and that would be uncensored. Or if you're on Steam, you had to use a VPN and then figure out a way to get some UK money on your Steam account and from there buy it on Steam. But while this kind of censorship would continue for almost the next decade, eventually they would change the stance on these Beyblade symbols being included in video games. And if you look at the most recent World War II Call of Duty, which was Call of Duty Vanguard, it is completely uncensored in the German version. Or more so, there is no extra German version like there was for the other Call of Duty games. Now obviously, Call of Duty World at War introduced Nazi zombies, and if you bought the German version, it's just not in the game. It's completely cut out. There's no way to play it in the German version unless you maybe patch it, but that seems something that's only doable on PC. And actually later, when Black Ops 1 came out, Zombies mode was included, but you couldn't shoot off any limbs, so you couldn't make any crawlers. There's also some more specific things about Modern Warfare 2 that Germany did that I'll mention later after we get to that game.
Okay, this one maybe wasn't as big of a controversy as some of the other ones, but the Call of Duty World at War Special Edition. What was this? You know, Call of Duty typically has a really good reputation of having some awesome special edition equipment to come with your game if you spend the extra dollar, or at least back in the day they did. I mean, Modern Warfare 2 gave you night vision goggles. That was insane. A real life RCXD? Okay. You know what Call of Duty World at War gave its players? a canteen that doesn't even work. You literally can't pour water or drink water or anything out of this canteen. It's just a for display thing only. Why does this exist? Why did this happen? I don't know. That wasn't it though for Call of Duty World at War. Call of Duty World at War would also see some other big criticisms, more on an international scale. Like for instance, Call of Duty 5 here was banned in Japan due to the depiction of Japanese soldiers during World War II and the violence associated with them. I mean, to be fair, Call of Duty World at War is a pretty brutal and gritty game, but I think most people understand that Call of Duty World at War falls under like free speech and nonfiction storytelling. And while it's surprising with how Japan typically treats things specifically like this in the same category, and the fact that they're usually very pro video games as an art form, it's surprising to see that Japan ended up banning this game altogether. Nonetheless, this still was a pretty big talking point back in the day when it actually happened. But with Call of Duty World at War now officially behind us, we can move on to talking about one Call of Duty game that came out and was probably the most controversial game of its time. One that made headlines, was on the news, was discussed and picked apart. We're talking about Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which released at the very end of 2009. And for starters, we can just go right into it. Let's talk about No Russian. Modern Warfare 2 pushed the boundaries when it came to storytelling, and to have you play as an undercover operative working alongside the bad guys committing terrorist acts, that was already a bold move. But then to allow the player to actually participate in an atrocity as a part of a level, that was something unheard of for a video game. And I think it did add a lot of shock value to Modern Warfare 2 and kind of gave it a little bit of this credibility in being one of the more realistic storytelling experiences for a military type game. I mean, believe it or not, in real global conflicts that Modern Warfare 2 is based on, these types of incidents happen on the regular, and soldiers who battle in this conflict are subjected to that horror on a regular basis, which is a lot of the time a very dramatic difference in what regular civilians are used to seeing when you live in like a Western country. I'm sure many soldiers who go into combat for the first time and see this stuff are shocked what really happens in these conflicts, and in a way, I think that having this level included in Modern Warfare 2 conveyed that same shock value onto the players who are experiencing this narrative game that parallels real world events. While it's gruesome, if anything, it served mostly as a social commentary about the stakes and influences of war and how others can leverage themselves into powerful positions and gain the upper hand in essentially what is a global game of chess, and acted as a catalyst to the story to heighten the stakes, much like what Call of Duty 4 had done with the big nuclear explosion level. And while most players who played through Modern Warfare 2 understood that, it did not stop the regular media to criticize and condemn Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 for the decision to include this level. And with just the sensitivity of this level, Modern Warfare 2 even had the option to skip the level as a prompt for players when they first turn on the game and jump into the campaign. But this criticism definitely became a widespread phenomenon. Modern Warfare 2 also did have some other pretty wild criticisms and controversies before and during its release. I think we should go ahead and talk about the Fight Against Grenade Spam ad. Back in 2009, to promote Modern Warfare 2, a special PSA type video featuring Cole Hamels, that American baseball player, where he condemns players for just randomly throwing grenades all the time, and then there's this tongue-in-cheek moment where like he gets stuck with a bunch of Semtex grenades, which was a new grenade added to Modern Warfare 2. I mean, at this point, grenade spamming had already been a pretty big thing in the previous Call of Duty games, and it'd be like if Halo tried to do like a tongue-in-cheek thing about teabagging, for example. The controversy wasn't about the fact that this PSA existed as much as the fake organization or cause that is being promoted in this PSA is the cause of fighting against grenade spam, which when you take the first letter of each word gives you the acronym of, well, a homophobic slur. The homophobic slur. Now this was back in 2009, and obviously the word itself was being used as an insult just to players and wasn't intended to actually be offensive to the LGBT community. The choice to use those words was probably just unprofessional, and over the years, name-calling, insults, and slurs kind of have matured to the point where you really shouldn't use certain words, regardless of context or intended purpose. But back then, words like this were used all the time in Call of Duty lobbies. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, still not something acceptable to use as marketing to promote a brand new game, and even more so now would not be accepted if this was something put out in like more modern times. This ad reminds me a little bit of that one South Park episode, if you know what I'm talking about. Still, and rightfully so, this advertising material was called out by various LGBT groups, and Activision did ultimately remove the video, though re-uploads of the video are all over the place online. Ultimately, the stakes in this controversy are kind of low, but it is wild material to think of a completely different time, and a time where, man, Call of Duty lobbies were absolutely the most hostile voice chatting communities out there.
And while the whole No Russian level was a big controversy in America and was featured on the news, it wasn't as big of a topic in Germany, because once again, we just had a censored version of Call of Duty that didn't let you hurt any civilians. So basically, if you shot anyone, it would give you that default, like, do not shoot civilians, game over screen, or whatever it says. And fun fact, it doesn't actually matter where in the world you are. I live in America now, and if I install the Modern Warfare 2 over my Steam account, it's still gonna be the German censored version. So they never, like, did a patch or changed it or anything like that.
Now going forward, Call of Duty Black Ops had its own fair share of controversies as well. We're not just talking about, you know, the regular war crimes type controversy where obviously they donned the uniform of the enemies in this level too. There was a bit of interesting controversy around Fidel Castro in Call of Duty Black Ops. Okay, this one was wild. Now, back when Call of Duty Black Ops was doing some pre-marketing material right before the game's launch, articles started emerging that there was a little bit of controversy about a mission of the Bay of Pigs invasion at the beginning of the campaign, where you allegedly go and kill Fidel Castro. Now, obviously, when the game came out, it was revealed that in the game, it wasn't the real Fidel Castro, but a body double. It did not stop the actual Cuban government to, voice out their concern about the game, and they were kind of upset about it. The Cuban government in 2011 actually said a segment of the game where players try to kill Fidel Castro actually glorifies real assassination attempts made by the United States. But in an article written on the government-run Cuban debate website, it was posted that what the United States government did not achieve in more than 50 years, it now tries to do virtually, drawing criticism to this narrative that I guess was in Black Ops 1, where maybe they didn't follow the story that it's actually a fake Fidel Castro, and then Fidel Castro plays a role in the story later on. But then the article goes on to say that the video game, on one hand, glorifies its illegal assassination attempts, and then on the other, it stimulates sociopathic attitudes in North American children and adolescents. I don't know. I thought the story was interesting, more enlightening about the actual history of the Cold War. I mean, for a game that's called Black Ops, they actually took stuff that was based in real-world secret operations and kind of brought it to the forefront of the story. I thought it was really good writing, so I don't know. The next big game to release was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, and obviously Modern Warfare 2 made huge headlines with its No Russian level. So how are they going to top that? Well, they did it by having the Modern Warfare 3 London attack level, which does something interesting.
And similarly to the public outcry that Modern Warfare 2's No Russian level caused, Modern Warfare 3's London attack level caused a lot of controversy as well. In the game, you see like this family on vacation, and you see this daughter and dad and mother, they're like frolicking around or something. I don't know what families do on vacation. And all of a sudden, like this van pulls up behind them and it explodes and the camera feed ends. And it's the introduction for this terrorist attack happening in London, right? But this draws obvious parallels to the 2005 London bombing. There was an actual terrorist attack that happened, where there was 4 major bombings across like the public transport system in the early morning rush hours, which was one of the bigger European terrorist attacks at the time. So them drawing obvious parallels and also, showing a child dying or insinuating that a child is dying, obviously caused a lot of outrage and a lot of people debating it. And, there was definitely people that were very upset about this level.
Call of Duty Black Ops 2 didn't have too much controversy around the time of its release, but it did get some controversy that caught up to it. Let's talk about the Call of Duty Black Ops 2 defamation lawsuit. Way back in 2014, 2 years after the release of Call of Duty Black Ops 2, apparently Activision was being sued by the family of Angolan rebel chief Jonas Savimbi. You see, in the first campaign mission of Black Ops 2, players aid Savimbi in a battle against MPLA forces. Here he's running with a grenade launcher, yelling to fight his brothers and whatnot, and while Savimbi himself passed away in 2002 in a battle against government forces, his family was seeking reparations for damages coming from defamation and damages related for the use of someone's likeness without getting prior consent. The family's legal representative even said that the game represented Savimbi as a big half-wit who wants to kill everybody, when the lawsuit argues that he was in fact a political leader and strategist. And a spokesperson from Activision's legal team said that Savimbi was a good guy and was portrayed fairly for who he was, a character of Angolan history, a guerrilla chief who fought the MPLA. But that wasn't the only time that Black Ops 2 was causing Activision to be sued for using someone's likeness, allegedly. Just a couple of months earlier, Manuel Noriega, a former military dictator in Panama, attempted to sue Activision over the depiction of him in Call of Duty Black Ops 2. This is that one part of the game where Noriega helps those CIA operators out before betraying them. And Noriega, who was 80 years old at the time, was claiming that he had lost profits as well as damages for the depiction of himself in Black Ops 2. Oh yeah, also he was in prison in Panama serving a 20-year sentence for crimes committed during his rule, including the murder of his political rival, Hugo Spadafora. Now, Activision decided to strike back and, go about with this lawsuit hard. They brought in Rudy Giuliani to defend their case, and then the suit was rejected by the judge of Los Angeles' Superior Court under the First Amendment right to free expression. Wow, what a story. Call of Duty Ghosts was interesting because this game was controversial just for existing. I mean, there was a lot of decisions made in the game that made the game not as popular as what some of the other Call of Duty games were, but as far as actual controversies went, there's only one that really comes to mind. Let's talk about Call of Duty Ghosts' reused animations. Okay, in media in general, reusing types of animations and whatnot is kind of commonplace. Look at the old Disney movies where they reused animation cells across multiple films. It was a little different though when a video game kind of did it, especially just reusing stuff from a recent game a few years back. And Call of Duty Ghosts kind of got caught red-handed doing this in the early part of the game. If you compare the cutscenes here with what's happening in one of the older Modern Warfare games, yeah, you can see that it's just reused across the board. Ultimately, it's really not the biggest deal, but Call of Duty Ghosts was already being criticized for feeling kind of rushed and maybe not as contentful as some of the other Call of Duty games. So this just kind of added on top of it, giving that reputation that development was lazy for this game and whatnot. So it was kind of an issue back in the day. Next year, when Call of Duty Advanced Warfare would release, this game was kind of interesting. It was praised for being innovative and different, and then also hated for kind of being innovative and different. I don't know, during this little period of time, Call of Duty tried to avoid a lot of big controversies. I mean, they're already facing criticisms about the quality of their games alone, so big picture controversies weren't really as commonplace. And I wonder if that did impact sales. I wonder if controversies did help increase the number of people buying these games. One big thing did come out of Call of Duty Advanced Warfare though, and that's the infamous press F to pay respects. I feel like this meme has already transcended the Call of Duty community well beyond, as this is now just a common thing across the board for Twitch streams and YouTube chats where people just now use F to pay respects. But it all started right here in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare during the funeral cutscene early on in the game, where the game asks PC players to literally press and hold F to pay respects, which seems like a redundant mechanic. Why is this a thing? I think it's kind of an unnecessary mechanic, and then also it was kind of a weird tone-deaf type mechanic to implement in something like a cutscene that's supposed to be all about the feels. I mean, it's a funeral, but they gotta have that engagement somewhere. Nonetheless, this ended up becoming a huge joke in just the gaming industry, and then it transcended beyond that. And you know what? I'm kind of okay with this existing because of the meme that it ended up creating, and yeah. Otherwise, Advanced Warfare wasn't too big on controversies at its time. I mean, it did have Kevin Spacey in it, but let's just go on to Black Ops 3. Moving forward to Call of Duty Black Ops 3, there actually wasn't too much controversy around this game initially, but we did have those weird Singapore tweets, which maybe we should talk about. Back in 2015, prior to the release of Call of Duty Black Ops 3, Call of Duty decided to rebrand their Twitter account to look like a fake news organization, and then tweet this: "Breaking news, unconfirmed reports are coming in of an explosion on the north bank of the Singapore marina." What? Now, these tweets were not clearly labeled as a part of a marketing campaign and appeared as if they were reporting real-world events and trying to use the front of an ARG to promote their game, much like other games have used in the past. Now, obviously, this ended up getting quite a bit of backlash from Twitter users who thought that the tweets were not only inappropriate, but maybe a little bit distressing. I mean, it's already hard enough to keep up with what's going on, and some people rely on Twitter, at least back then. Nonetheless, it was just kind of a really silly idea in the first place, but Activision and the Call of Duty Twitter account would end up responding to this, clarifying that the tweets were a part of a marketing campaign and it was not intended to be taken as if there were real events happening. But this controversy kind of left a lot of fans scratching their heads as to why they would go this route to promote their game. It just seemed like an odd choice, and it did start maybe this conspiracy theory that maybe Activision were purposely trying to get a rise out of people in order to get more eyes on Call of Duty Black Ops 3, and Call of Duty Black Ops 3 did sell pretty well, so maybe it did work after all. Also, when it comes to Black Ops 3, and also to an extent Advanced Warfare and other Call of Duty games moving forward for a couple of years, there was a lot of controversy when it came to loot boxes and the pay-to-win nature that this ended up causing in the multiplayer competitive scene for a while. Luke knows a little bit more about that, so I'll let him cover it.
With Advanced Warfare, Call of Duty introduced supply drops or loot boxes or whatever you want to call them, and at the time, people didn't care as much. I mean, there was people saying it's a bad system, and yeah, obviously it is. But it was only in one game so far, and it didn't become a big talking point until they were reintroduced in Black Ops 3, where a lot of people became kind of aware that this whole loot box system or supply drop system is kind of pay to win. And that's kind of where the whole debate around this system shifted. You know, a lot of people saying this is pay to win. You just pay for loot boxes and you get better guns the more loot boxes you buy. Obviously, it doesn't straight up work that way because you still have to pull the gun from the loot box, but definitely if you invest more money, you'll have better guns. And ever since then, I mean, these supply drops have been controversial and they're always talked about as like a bad feature whenever they reappear. I think they reappeared in Infinite Warfare, then Modern Warfare Remastered even had supply drops, which that is so weird. World War II also had this weird system where you call in the supply drops while you're like standing in this hub world or something. That was like bizarre. And nowadays, Call of Duty Mobile is still riddled with these supply drops, and you know, people complain about them there too. But I guess they did eventually phase them out of the main releases because, I mean, obviously they were just so negatively talked about everywhere that I feel like they must have even realized how bad this is perceived. But who knows, maybe they'll come back. Maybe the next Black Ops game will have you open some loot boxes.
After Black Ops 3 and 2 years of advanced movement, fans were really wanting something to kind of take Call of Duty back to its roots, maybe something more boots on the ground like, and instead, the announcement of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare came, which showed advanced movement and another futuristic setting. I mean, do we dedicate a whole point to this? Call of Duty Infinite Warfare just existing? Not too long ago, we actually did a full review where we went back and re-experienced Call of Duty Infinite Warfare just to see what it was like, and it was okay, I guess. But man, the announcement was one of the biggest backlashes that Call of Duty has ever seen. Matter of fact, at the time, it was the most disliked video on YouTube, period. That was a really big claim to fame. Or infamy. Infamy. Okay, then there was a little bit of controversy with Call of Duty Modern Warfare Remastered, which came out alongside Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. When this game was originally supposed to release, it didn't have all of the maps from the original COD 4, which people were like, that's really weird. There was a lot of backlash with that happening, and Activision later announced that the maps would be coming like a month later at a later date. Everyone could calm down. But then when they decided to introduce the DLC maps from back in the day, the Variety Map Pack DLC, which had like 4 extra maps. Back then, the maps were $10, but now with the new remastered version of the game, the DLC was $15? That's just weird. It was just an odd choice to like bring back old maps that are, you know, like a decade old almost at that point, and then make them more expensive. But you did get loot boxes with it, so there was extra value there. Yeah, this one's still one of the weirdest things I think that Activision did that rightfully deserved its backlash that it got, but just a weird call across the board. Call of Duty World War II was really interesting. This game was kind of like a return to the old days of Call of Duty. It was the first World War II game since 2008, so there was a lot of excitement about it, and the pre-release content showing off what the game would look like really looked like it was going to be like a narrative experience on the campaign side of things, and then also have a multiplayer. But like the older days of Call of Duty before multiplayer easily became the most important thing of Call of Duty. So this was actually really appealing to a lot of people who maybe had fallen off Call of Duty over the years and we're just looking for like a narrative experience, especially since World War II games hadn't really been so commonplace all of a sudden. Like, it had been a while since there had been good World War II games. Prior to the release of the game, there was kind of a little bit of conversation rehashing older Call of Duty games and criticizing some of those older games for not necessarily exploring the true atrocities that happened during World War II, namely that one big one that somehow people still think that they can deny happened. So people were kind of already discussing about how, like, in the past Call of Duty games, like the whole European front and German front never really showed a lot of those aspects of the true nature of World War II. And there was already starting to be like this discussion about whether or not World War II would follow through with that and kind of like show those darkest moments of the war. But after a while, I guess some of like the people behind the team announced that they would in fact be exploring some of those dark corners of World War II, which is just a weird announcement if you think about it. I mean, that part wasn't controversial. The fact that they announced it actually kind of stopped any controversies from arising, because the inclusion was trying to stay both historically accurate and prominent and relevant to why World War II stories are important all these years later. And then Call of Duty World War II released, and I think for how much people had expected from this game and how big they thought it was going to be, a lot of people felt maybe a little bit let down by the overall like presentation day one of the game. The campaign itself was off to a pretty decent start, actually. They did a lot of really cool things in the campaign, covered some interesting areas like the whole like French uprising and some other really cool unique set pieces, and then things kind of go like over the top Fast and Furious Hollywood style for a bit, and that's a little wild. And then it seems like the campaign just like abruptly ends right when you're rearing your head around the third act, which kind of made people feel like, okay, they hyped up this narrative experience and then the story never really goes anywhere and ends up just staying just as short as all the other Call of Duty campaigns. Then you tie that to the fact that this Call of Duty game, with the exception of like the little war mode game type that had like unique sections and maps for those, just at its core though, the base multiplayer game released with just 8 maps, which is absolutely insane. Like, that is ridiculous that a Call of Duty game could release with so few maps. And this was before Call of Duty shifted into their like free DLC model where they do like cosmetics that cost money and then you get like new maps periodically as the seasons move along. No. If you wanted more maps, you had to pay for it. So this game really felt like you were getting half a Call of Duty game for full price and then you were expected to pay another $60 to get the rest of the game. And that was really lame. But then there's also some other weird things that they did when it came to censorship once again, but instead of censorship being restricted just to like certain countries that had rules, they decided to do a blanket censorship across the entire multiplayer aspects of the game. So like multiplayer and zombies mode, which was a really odd decision. All right, now let's talk about Call of Duty Black Ops 4, which, wow, what a mess the development was with this game. But with the rise in popularity of games like Fortnite and PUBG, Call of Duty wanted in on some of that battle royale action and decided to put all of their resources forward halfway through development into making sure that this game would launch with a battle royale. Now, the battle royale was a really cool idea. The only downside about it though was that this would now make Call of Duty Black Ops 4 the first ever Call of Duty game to completely remove the campaign from the game, which obviously was a huge blow to people who cared about the story sections of Call of Duty. And remember, while Blackout was cool, this was around the time though where a lot of the Battle Royale games were already free to play, like Fortnite and Apex Legends. So Black Ops 4 being kind of paywalled with its Battle Royale and then also not having a campaign, it just made it kind of an uphill battle for a lot of people, and rightfully so, the game got some criticism there. And of course, this game still suffered from the same loot box problem that we've talked about earlier. But I would say after Call of Duty Black Ops 4 released, this ended an era where like the controversies that Call of Duty were facing were kind of minimal at best, and entered an era where Call of Duty was maybe actively picking some controversial topics to cover, knowing that there would be discussion, and that would kind of drive more eyes on the game. At least that's my, speculation. So Call of Duty 2019 really just like knocked things out of the park when it came to controversies. Like, there was a big list with Modern Warfare and just things that people were angry about for whatever reason. And some of them are really interesting just to talk about and look into, because there's some valid responses out there, but also some interesting things that you might not have realized like caught on as controversies themselves. One of the early ones that people were really upset about actually was that in the multiplayer side of things, it was announced that there'd be a kill streak where you could use white phosphorus, an extremely lethal and controversial chemical weapon, essentially, that is frowned upon for military use. And I think it's is that a war crime, Luke?
I mean, the use of chemical weapons might be, so I mean, this might fall into it, yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert.
White phosphorus definitely has like a lot of like a big it's like a big no-no. It's a big gray area. And then, of course, Call of Duty introducing it, people kind of jump on that whole train of like, hey, look, you're allowed to do war crimes as a kill streak reward, and that's not good. It was a weird thing because I feel like Call of Duty's always been doing war crimes. So, like...
I mean, there's nukes in the game. Like, nobody complained about the nuke in Modern Warfare 2, you know?
Right. I just felt like it was like at that point in time, people were just like looking for something to be mad about. And then, you know, use white phosphorus as the thing. Rather than like, wow, look, this is like an example of like, you know, the harshness of war and what can come from it. People were just mad. I thought that was a weird one. Then there was also some other things Modern Warfare 2019 had people mad about. Like, for instance, there was the one level where I think you play as Farah and Hadir, I think was his name. And you play as them as children. And, like, there's this crazy stuff going on. And at one point, you pull this... You're like a 5 or 6 year old kid and you pull out a revolver and shoot someone, which is insane. And people were upset about that because they were like, look, it's glorifying children using weaponry, but it was also once again supposed to like highlight the fact that these were like children being like thrown into a war, which was part of the story, the narrative, and the commentary, like we talked about with everything else here. So that was also a really interesting, like controversial part, but they were trying to make Modern Warfare 2019 so much darker than what we had seen with the more recent Call of Duty games. They kind of had to put something worth, you know, talking about, and I think that was maybe one of the ones that they went for. And then of course there was also there was like a torture scene with some waterboarding. Torture scenes never seem to go well. There's always controversies.
Waterboarding always controversial, yeah. GTA had waterboarding too, or like torture, and like people were upset about it.
Yeah, torture and waterboarding I think too.
But I think, you know, some of the criticism with the waterboarding scene came from it being like, it was kind of like a mini game, or like, I know what they were trying to do, but like you had to dodge the water like left and right with your stick, you know what I mean? It's kind of weird. I don't know.
Right, like you have to aim it or whatever, or move it.
Yeah, like yeah, it was like, I don't know. I'm pretty sure on the screen it says like press left stick to dodge the water or something. Like, it's just like stupid. I don't know.
I don't remember that levels too well. I played it, but man, I really don't remember it. But yeah, Modern Warfare 2019 was a game. There was also like a bigger controversy where there were like borderline, or the idea was like, for the sake of this story, parallels to real world events were drawn, but then borderline rewritten, or very much so rewritten from what actually happened in history, if that makes sense. I think you were talking about this a bit earlier before we started recording.
Yeah, they mentioned, like, I mean, they referenced the Highway of Death, right, which is a real life event where after the invasion of Kuwait, Iraqi forces were retreating, right, and then there's like this long ass highway between Kuwait and Iraq, right, and like the US bombed like the retreating military, right, which is like controversial, right, because like, I mean, those are retreating forces, you know, why are they bombing them? They reference it in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, and they make it seem like the Russians did it, which is like, I don't know, just like a weird like throwaway line,
like pushing the blame off of the allied modern day allied forces. It's
not like they played it up as like this big story point. They're just like, it's just like they mentioned that the Russians did this Highway of Death thing. It's just like weird, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, I get it's a fictional world, right? But there has been just like a low level of criticism across all Call of Duty games for always like telling the side or telling the story from the perspective of like the Western countries or like the Allied forces. Like, we haven't had a Call of Duty game where you like have a campaign on the Axis side, right? And we understand why they don't do that. Like, that's a very complex thing, but historically speaking, this has been like the narrative for every Call of Duty game. So it is interesting how it's like another example of like the good guys versus bad guys narrative being like pushed into this, even in a situation that's just like a throwaway line. Yeah, that's a really good point though.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Infinity Ward even responded to it, and they said something like their story and their campaign is about reporting what is happening in the conflict zones, but like they say that and then they misrepresent what actually happened. So it's like just really weird, you know?
Right. Especially when like drawing from like a real world situation exactly like that.
But I think that was all the Modern Warfare 2019 controversies. I think there was one small one where like they stole someone's Instagram art.
Was that 2019 or did that happen in Modern Warfare 2? I can't remember.
Modern Warfare 2 was a bigger thing, but Modern Warfare 2019 was just like some Instagram post. You know how Halo did it recently.
Right. And then in Modern Warfare 2, though, we just talked about that now. There was an entire operator that was just like very much taken from some art that someone did.
Right, there's this Chinese artist called like Sailin, and he made like this like wolf soldier, or maybe it's a dog soldier, I don't know. It's like something furry, right? And then like Call of Duty comes out with this skin, and it looks almost 1-to-1 like this guy's art. And I mean, you know, there was a bunch of people outspoken about it, and Activision took down the bundle.
I wonder if that guy ever got compensated. Like, did they just pay him?
Probably not. I mean, or I don't know. I mean,
Probably not Activision.
that's my guess. Probably not. But I mean, you know, this bundle was very close to the guy's art. Like, I think they changed the color of the scarf slightly.
Oh, there you go.
And then they're trying to sell it as a like tracer pack for like, I don't know how much is. Those are $20 or $25.
Like $20 to $30. Yeah, they're expensive.
Crazy, dude.
Also, with Modern Warfare 2, there was that whole like art museum and map naming like controversy. Was it? There was a lot of misinformation, I know, all over the place about what was actually going on. But what we do know was there was an art museum map that was in the beta of the game, and when the game came out, that map wasn't there. It did later come out at a later date, but there was a lot of speculation back then that there was backlash from the art museum not wanting its likeness used, and then that extended to like people spreading misinformation about like that hotel map also upset, and that map would be going away, but then that map never ended up going away, I think. And then the art museum came in anyways, so then there was confusion there. And I think like a lot of this was just speculation off of the main thing that actually happened, which was that racetrack map where there was like a racetrack map and had a very, what was the specific name? Do you remember?
It's like the Marina Bay Grand Prix or something.
Right. And they ended up renaming the map altogether. They took down social media posts and they were like, here's like generic racetrack map based on this real world location. And I wonder if like people took that controversy and then just tried to like extend it or speculate on all these other maps. And yeah, like I know that like those rumors those spread around, some of them were fake. And I don't know if it ever was confirmed what was happening with the art museum one.
I don't know if we found out about the art museum. We know for sure that the racetrack map was changed from announcement to release, like the name of it.
And did the hotel level ever go away? Didn't you and I find out that hotel rumor that everyone was talking about was like just some like parody Twitter account?
Yeah.
Like we looked into it ourselves and we're like, oh yeah, this is a like fake account. And then we're kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but like if we want to just like backtrack a little bit, Cold War had like that tinfoil hat controversy. I think you were telling me a little bit about it.
Yeah, there's like a conspiracy theorist, like, you know, almost like a classic type guy, like chemtrails, you know, AIDS isn't real type stuff. You know what I mean? That crazy stuff. And he did an interview in the 80s with this KGB defector, right? And that interview, you know, has led to a lot of people using it for modern conspiracy theories. And Cold War included clips from the interview in the trailer, right? So that was a little bit controversial. But I mean, I think they were just trying to set up the story and the narrative. And I mean, I think it works for that. But I mean, you know, if you use a polarizing person like that in your trailer, obviously there's going to be backlash and people, you know, not taking it that well.
That makes sense. And then Vanguard had some criticisms, mostly based on
the game being bad.
Well, yes. I think like so many people like checked out when Vanguard was announced that like some of the controversies aren't talked about as much. There was the big Warzone thing with Verdansk being sunsetted, not being able to play that, and then the whole Warzone 1 getting sunsetted later on with Modern Warfare 2 coming out. So those received quite a bit of backlash. But Vanguard's campaign was really weird. There was like a lot of attention to detail with some parts, and then a lot of just like historical inaccuracies all over the place in other parts. So that was weird. They were like trying to do something interesting, and then towards the end of the story, it's just like so fictionalized. It's if you've played it, you know what I'm talking about. It's definitely not the best Call of Duty, but it no longer can be a contender for the worst Call of Duty. Well, I guess if you have an opinion, their opinions can be subjective.
And there's Black Ops 4.
Yeah, Black Ops 4 doesn't have a campaign, does it? But Modern Warfare 3 is kind of one of the most disliked campaigns, and that had a bunch of controversy because it's probably one of the shortest Call of Duty campaigns that ever exist. It reused assets not only from its own multiplayer, but also from Warzone 1, which of course Call of Duty reuses assets all the time, but it usually isn't like reusing full-on like open world levels from previous games.
That you can't play anymore either.
Right, you can't play, unfortunately. They put it there as, I don't know, like it was just a little weird.
It almost felt like it was supposed to be like a nostalgia bait for Warzone 1, but it's like too early. It's only been like 2 years.
Right, and then on top of that, like we still don't have Verdansk back, and I think this is actually going to probably push us into a new era of Call of Duty, where we're going to see like these double header games, I think, where we have like Modern Warfare 2 followed by Modern Warfare 3. We'll be surprised if we see that with Black Ops in the future. And I'm just worried that it means we're going to get like a really bad Call of Duty every other year until like the feedback cycle finally gets to Activision and they change like their plans moving forward. And that'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with that. But it definitely, I think in general, Modern Warfare 3 had a lot of controversy just because the fact that it wasn't unique enough of an experience. It was just very much something kind of thrown together, it felt like. The fact that it's Modern Warfare 3 with all these Modern Warfare 2 maps, it just makes it feel like the planning was off. Like maybe these maps were supposed to come out a year ago and they're just like moving things around.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like $70 DLC. If it's even $70. Is it $80? I don't know. But
I think it's 70, but it's already dropping in price pretty heavily.
It's just like a weird formula. I don't think it's gonna... I mean, Call of Duty is bleeding players too, I think. But I mean, they've still got a lot of players. But like, I feel like for Call of Duty, it's not a lot of players, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like for most games, it would be a lot of players, but I think for Call of Duty, internally, they're like realizing that they don't have as many players as they should maybe have.
Yeah, and it's almost like they're getting back to this like weird model where they're nickel and diming players, because this does feel like just DLC. But then on top of that, it's like if you spent $70 on Modern Warfare 2, those maps are now accessible in Modern Warfare 3, which is cool, but also it means that you never should have had to buy Modern Warfare 2 in the first place because you could just play those maps in Modern Warfare 3 through the little playlist thing. So it's a whole mess. It's I don't know what Call of Duty's doing. Nonetheless, I think we're still Call of Duty fans, which is cool, and it's cool to look through the history and see all these different things that Call of Duty has been faced with, and like there's these little pockets of history associated with it that we can kind of, you know, retrospectively look back at.
It is arguably the like biggest FPS franchise. I mean, it probably is, right? And it's like the most well-known FPS franchise in the world.
I think it's like the fourth biggest entertainment franchise, period, which is big. Or it's up there.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask your parents, they'll know what Call of Duty is. But if you ask them what I don't know, Battlefield or Rainbow Six Siege is, they'll be like, what the hell?
True, that's true. I mean, at least if you have older parents.
I mean, yes, obviously. I mean, if you're 13 right now watching this, and your parents are like, I don't know, 33, they might know what Rainbow Six Siege and Battlefield is.
Well, cool. This was fun. This was kind of different to go look through like the history of a specific game again with Call of Duty. If you guys didn't know, we did this for Halo, the Halo franchise, about like a year ago. It's such a good video. We unfortunately didn't do the podcast commentary type stuff like this in those videos back in the day. And there's so much with Halo. If you want another video like this, you should go watch that video, because it's a wild ride. Even if you're not like the biggest Halo fan, just seeing what Halo fans have had to go through over like a decade is
there's definitely like a ton of crazy stuff that happened with Halo. It's definitely worth watching. Yeah.
It's wild. I would say, like, comparatively, Call of Duty's tame to Halo.
It is true. I mean, Call of Duty's controversy are more, like, historically and politically based a lot of times, right?
Right. And Halo's just, like, incompetency based. Just like, whoa, how are they... Or it's 343. It's not even just Halo. It's just the company that's been in charge for 11 years. We didn't even go through the entire history of Halo. Just the newer company and how ridiculous it's been.
Like, 2011 till today. Or, I mean... whenever the video came out. Yeah. Maybe with Halo 7 we'll have to make an updated video, who knows.
Right. And maybe with the next Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for watching, guys. Huge shout out to our patrons for supporting our channel, letting us do stuff like this. Also, if you guys need to get some gamer subs, use our code and our link and all that, so you get yourself that extra discount. And thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time with a brand new video.
Bye.
Bye.